Hello, everybody. What we're going to be spending some time going over today is we're going to start our drafting unit. Basically, what a general definition of drafting is, it's a uniform type of communication, and it often uses symbols, numbers, lines, anything that could describe describe information or something about an object, a dwelling. You might say that drafting is the beginning components of understanding architecture or blueprints or anything of that nature. What you should notice is that what I have as an example up on the screen, that is called a drafting sketch or plate. They are all kind of set up very similar in that they'll have a drawing, which in this case this is a single perspective drawing, which is only showing one view of an object, whereas if you're showing something that has if you're showing more than one view, that's known as a multi-perspective drawing. What all these drawings have that are similar, they all start off with at the bottom, on most of them, there will be a title block, where of course we can put our name, the title of the drawing, which is called a lever, and then the date, which the date would be whatever that date is that the student is working on the drawing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through and describe some of the different types of lines that we would use in drafting, as well as some other things that will make up a drafting drawing. First and foremost is that we need to understand that in drafting we need to be very, very neat. Okay, if we make a mistake, we need to cleanly erase it. So the first thing that you need to make sure to use is you need to make sure that you have a well-sharpened pencil. Now, I have one of these standard pencils right here that I'm going to be using. If you have something that might be a little bit more easier for you to use, such as a mechanical pencil, that is fine. The big thing is you want to make sure that you have that point. All right? As what we're doing is we have this handout that has the notes, or that has the sketch itself. You will also have this sheet that has different lines used in drafting. We're going to kind of be going back and forth as we're kind of describing these. The other thing that I would suggest having is I would have either a couple colored pencils or a couple different highlighters, such as what I'm going to use here. And that way, we'll be able to mark everything that we need to mark. Okay, just so that we kind of understand what's what and what we're labeling and all those things. First and foremost, there are 10 or so different lines here that we can use in drafting, but for the scope of our class, we will probably not be using every single one of these lines, just so that we kind of understand that. I just make sure that you have this as a reference. The ones that we're going to be using consistently through the course of our drafting unit, I will make sure to kind of note those, and those are the ones that we're going to spend time kind of going over. The first line that we will talk about is that one right there. It says borderline. Well, if you look at this drawing that I've given you, you will see that they give you the name of the actual line that's being used. The middle column, it shows you exactly like where it would be used. And then over here, all the way to the right, it gives you a word definition. So borderline, what you should notice is that it is a heavy line and it is solid. And it's going to border your entire drawing. So kind of like when we talk about how Missouri has a boundary or border that separates us from the state of Illinois and Iowa and all the other states that border our Missouri. And that just means is if we look at our drawing, this right here, and I'm going to label that BL, that is a borderline right there of itself, okay? These lines that border the entire drawing. Another way to think of the borderlines is they are the margins in a drafting sketch. That means that we're not going to have any figures or drawings drawn outside that area. We're going to keep it within the area that we've designated that we're going to draw in, if that makes sense. So the heaviest of all lines, that's a borderline. The next line that we have listed, that is a visible line. And if you notice, it's very similar to a borderline, is that it is solid. It doesn't have any dashes or what are known as breaks. All right. The other thing that we note about that is when you compare it to a borderline, it is rather thin. All right. And that just means it's not going to be as thick, so it makes it distinct. It is going to outline the objects in a finished drawing. So right here is where it's pointing to. Those are all considered visible lines. Or another word that goes by is an object line. Okay? So object line or visible line, if you see those terms either used in the course of our work, they are interchangeable. And that's one good thing. That's one thing to kind of remember. All right? So now that we've said that, we're going to label the visible line or object line, however you want to know that as, on our drawing. Well, I'm going to go over it in blue. Object lines will give your drawing or object itself, it'll give it its physical shape or what it should look like. So those are all examples right there of we're going to go OL or VL, and that's how we label our object or our visible line. Okay, so that's what gives it its shape. That's a good thing. That's a good point to kind of remember that. The next line that we will go over, so we've gone over the border line, the visible line. The next line that we're going to go over, we're going to skip down, and we're going to talk about a hidden line. And if you look at the example that I've given for a hidden line, all right, and what it says in general, it says lines that are not visible at that viewing surface. So if I have a hidden line, it's dashed. It's not going to be a solid line. At the most, it's going to be the line itself is going to be about 1/4 of an inch long. It's going to have 1/8 of an inch gap or break in between each line, and it's going to be very consistent. That is just going to tell me that there is an opening, whether it be a cut or a drill hole or anything of that sort, that there is an opening of some kind that I cannot see. Okay, so I get what we could use as an example. If I look at my roll of tape here, I see that I have this little opening. If I would hold it on its side and I really can't tell, if I was going to mark this as my drawing, now of course I'm doing this in a freehand format. These lines of drafting, I'd want to try and use a ruler if possible whenever I'm doing my sketches, but I'm just showing this merely on this roll of tape here, so you kind of understand when I would see a visible or a hidden line and how I would know to project that. That just tells me that there is a cut of some kind here that I need to make sure to note that it's not a completely solid piece. So like that I know that there's an opening here. If I didn't have hidden lines listed, this would be completely solid, like let's say a hockey puck or a disc. All right, but if you do see any of those dashed lines, that just means that you have an opening of some kind that you cannot particularly see from that particular view. So we have to make sure to draw it. All right, so now if we look at our example here, the lines that have dash marks, those are probably going to be our hidden lines. So we have 2 right there, which just show where this hole is going to be drilled. That's the opening of the hole. And what these holes represent, they represent pivot points at where the lever, which is what this is, and how that's going to move. All right. Notice that these hidden lines, they are drawn all the way through. That just means that the hole is going to go all the way through. It's not going to be a semi-concealed hole. All right. I also want to label this HL. And I've labeled that in 2 spots. So we have our border line, which you can't see that, so I need to bring that out a little bit more. There we go. All right, so we have our border line. We have our visible line, which is the blue line that gives it its shape. and then we have our dash lines there, and then those are that particularly is our hidden line. All right, and just know if you see that, that just means that there's going to be a hole or an opening that I can't draw or describe or physically see from my view. Okay, and we'll go through this a little bit more, and hopefully this will make a little bit more sense as we're going forward. Okay, next line that we are going to talk about, we are going to talk about a center line. And if you look at the example on your drawing or on the handout that you have in front of you, you will notice that it is a solid line that has a dash and a couple of breaks in the center. And what the center line is going to do, it's going to locate the centers of arcs and circles and symmetrical objects. Now, when you're looking at a symmetrical object, that means if you divide it in half, all right, it means that we're going to have, if you're dividing an object in half, so such as this example right here, the left side is going to be similar to the right side. They're going to be mirror images of each other. And the same thing here. If we look at that opening right there, there's a center line that's slipping right here in half, so that your top portion and your bottom portion, you know that that's going to be the same. All right. So if we look at this right here, this line right here, that would be an example of a center line. That right there, that is an example of a center line. Basically, where it's dividing the hole that we have drilling here, it just tells me that it's going to be the same on the left as it is on the right. And how I know that's a center line is because this line is going to go the full length of the object, whether it's height, width, or length, it doesn't matter. All right? And then you got that little dash right in the middle. So I know that that's going to be a center line. All right? And that should make those very, very distinct. Okay? And then just to kind of go through a couple of these other lines used, I don't have an example on our drawing, but if you see any type of a cutting plane line, that's just going to show an exploded view of whether you're showing a cut or an opening or some detail within the object that you can't see from that view. Okay, so that those are used very rarely in the type of drawing that we're going to use. But if you're looking at more mechanical drawing, they're going to have detailed descriptions of what you have of what specifically that you need to show in the drawing. The short break line, that is just used to just show if you are using a short break line, you're trying to just basically say it's a cut for a larger piece, so that we could show that piece on our paper. Sometimes you'd probably draw that to scale. And it's also a freehand type of drawing. Notice down here we have a couple. It's at number 7. It says, let me see, make sure you can see that. Okay, so next up we're going to talk about is number 7. That is our leader line. Our leader line, it leads us to information about the drawing. Okay, so now when you look at the leader line, it's going to either be an extension line, which they extend off the object, or it's going to be a dimension line. And how you know an extension line is distinct is it's going to make contact with our dimension line. All right, dimension line it's going to have arrows at each end and a number that's centered. Okay, so it's very important to note that. All right, so if we look at our example here, these right here, and I could go through and find, literally dozens of different extension lines. All right, they do not make contact with the object itself, which you should notice very closely. But what it does make contact with is our dimension line right here. And I'm not going to go over all this. We're just going to call that the dimension line right there. And how you know a dimension line is a dimension line, it's going to have arrows at each end. Okay? And it's going to touch the extension lines, which I'm going to label those right here, EL. And that's dimension lines. Those are some of the basic lines that we will use in drafting. just kind of the main thing to notice is that they are neat, and it's very, very important that you are consistent when drawing your lines. Thank you.